Welcome to Pine Tree News, and I'm talking with Victor Beisle. Beisle, how do you pronounce your last name?
Beisle.
Beisle. Talking with Victor Beisle about off-grid living and libertarian values. I'd like to pass the mic over to you, Vic, and ask you just to tell us a bit about yourself.
Sure. So I think, the libertarian views, I'll start with that part. That was something that I didn't actually realize even what it was. I don't think I understood what a libertarian was until about a decade ago. And surprisingly, there's a huge percentage of our population that really are libertarians. They just don't know it. They don't realize that libertarians want less government involvement. They want less government in general. They want their own freedoms to be who they are, practice their whatever it is, their religion, their sexuality, their belief systems of all kinds, to be able to provide for themselves, to just be themselves without having someone poke into their business all the time. And most people don't understand that really is the essence of a libertarian. And I think the thing that attracted me to that more than anything else was the more independence you have and the more you rely on yourself, or the more you take responsibility for your own place in life and what you have and what you're able to provide for others and what your responsibilities are to those around you to have a good community, the better life is in general. And so as I grew older and matured, I realized that those really fit with who I wanted to be. I didn't want someone else to take care of me. I didn't feel that something was always someone else's fault. I had a part in everything that happened around me, and I could take responsibility for my part. And that really was the essence of the libertarian side of things. The off-grid just fits with it. The bottom line is, if you can feed yourself, and if you can heat your home, and if you can create your own power, if that's part of it, if you need power, because it's not an actual necessity, to be honest. But if you can do those things, you become self-reliant and you become responsible to you and you only, and you're not asking for someone else to provide. And there's no such thing as, if you've got to make your own power and there's a power outage, that's your problem. You don't call someone and then complain about it on the internet. You fix it. And
Right.
that's way more attractive to me than being part of one of the kids on the Weiner bus. So anyway.
So speaking of buses, let's say I kind of want to do a little rewind here, because for people listening, you live right now. Let's tell us a little bit about your setup right where you're at right now.
Well, right now I live off grid, so to speak. And I think that's one of the things we have to define is what is on the grid and what is off the grid, because there's a huge variance in what that looks like. So most people would think I live way off the grid. In other words, I produce all my own power, and we produce a lot of our own food and so on. We're not hooked into a natural gas line. We don't get our heat from hydro. We have propane trucked in, but right there, that's still being connected to the grid in essence.
Right.
Because the propane, if the supply line breaks, well, we're SOL. We need that, right? So to keep things warm. Mm-hmm. And so there's all these different levels of being on or off grid. So the place we live in now, anyway, we do produce all our own power. It produces a lot of power. We don't want for anything. It's like anybody else's house as far as power goes. And that one's done with solar, with a large battery bank and a small generator backup, which frankly we don't use much because the system is sized properly.
Nice. But
yeah, it's worked out really well. There are many beauties to it. One is that you don't get a hydro bill every month, and my neighbors constantly complain about their hydro bills, and shocking what they pay. Mm. But even more than that is the power outage side of things, and we regularly will, we can see down into the valley, and all of a sudden the lights will go out everywhere. And we realize that everybody but us doesn't have power.
Wow.
So the only guy with power is the off-grid guy, which is kind of interesting. So anyway.
So your motivation to do this, is it coming from strictly, I don't want to be dependent on, the systems at large, or is it more of a prepper vibe, or is it both?
No, it's both of those, and it's more than that. So first of all, yes, I don't want to be dependent on anybody. That's a big part of it. The prepper piece, there's a little piece of that. I mean, when things fall apart, if you, again, are able to provide for yourself, it only falls apart to some extent. And, what can you do to protect that? But the other part is that for all intents and purposes, being able to go off grid and have your own power supply, especially one that isn't running off a big diesel generator somewhere, is, I'll say, new-ish. In other words, it's still not mainstream by any means. It's coming on fast.
Because solar panel technology only really made it, to make that feasible in the last, 10, 20 years, right?
Decade, yeah, probably the last decade. Because prior to that, it was just it was so cost prohibitive that unless, it was ridiculous to do it on your own. But the cost of solar in particular has come down a long way. The cost of batteries has come down a lot. The cost of a backup generator has come way down. The only thing that the cost has gone up in is the cost of fuel to fuel that generator if you need to use it. So, and, we barely use ours. We run through about 25 gallons of fuel a year. So it's not an insane amount. But anyways,
is your diesel? Is it diesel or what? Your generator?
It's gasoline.
Gas. Okay, cool.
We only have which I would like to change that as well. That's something that in future projects I will change, and it has to do with the fact that gasoline is no longer stable like it was back in the bad old days when we had leaded gas. Mm-hmm. And so, if you don't use your generator very much, eventually the gasoline basically turns to turpentine, and unless if you have a good old-fashioned Chinese generator that has really rough tolerances, it'll run on that garbage. But one of your newer Hondas or something won't, and so they're not ideal for long terms without using them. And
so
really,
is diesel more shelf stable kind of thing?
Yeah, diesel is very, very shelf stable, but what's even better is propane. And so you can get a dual fuel generator, a 10 kilowatt Canadian Tire Special generator that is already set up for dual fuel, and you hook it to propane. Well, that propane will last for 10 years if you never use it. Like it just doesn't change. Propane doesn't change. And so that's very, very useful. And then the second part of that that's really intriguing to me is that, and it takes a lot of research and know-how, but you can put methane into a propane bottle, and if you scrub it properly, that methane can burn through that generator just fine and power your generator. Well, you can make your own methane. Methane is just a byproduct of decomposition. So whether it's from scraps around your place or whether it's from your sewer system or whatever, we're all making methane every day. That's what we do it, right? And so that to me is super intriguing. I haven't done it yet, but I've been really watching it because I don't see why we wouldn't harvest our own methane, store it, scrub it and store it. And when I say scrub it, it's because hydrogen sulfide is about 4 or 5% of what is produced in methane, and hydrogen sulfide is poisonous, and you don't want to be, burning that. But it's relatively easy to scrub by pushing it through water. Anyway, collecting your own methane would mean that you're collecting what is quote unquote a greenhouse gas, which is a whole other rabbit hole to go and talk about. But, now you're taking that, and instead of just releasing it into the atmosphere, you're capturing it and then repurposing it for another day when you might need it to produce power or heat or cook off of it, for that matter.
Wow, how would that work? You would just stick all your waste into some kind of bin and have some kind of gas separator coming off the top?
Yeah, exactly. So there's great examples of this on YouTube. There's a guy who shows how to build one out of a IBC, which is International Beverage Container, the 1100 liter tanks.
Right.
And so what they start out with is they start out with water and usually cow manure, right? Good scoop of cow manure that gets the bacteria growing in there,
Yeah.
and then they put three pipes into that top of that tank, and the three pipes, one is a feeder pipe with a big funnel on the top that you dump whatever down there,
Hmm.
almost anything that's biodegradable. Um, but most people, it's like kitchen scraps or poop or whatever, right? And so that goes down in there. And then there's a second pipe that comes up that draws. It basically takes the air off the top of the tank, and so as the tank fills up, it pressurizes the tank, and what ends up being that air that's at the top of the tank ends up being methane.
Right.
It fills up with methane, so it pushes that off, and somewhat passively, you have that coming out of the tank and into an airbag of some sort. A lot of guys use big inner tubes. You can buy purpose-made or airbags now for this. And so you can literally walk down and go, oh, I've got X number of cubic feet of methane. You can see it. You can see it as it fills the bag. So, and then there's a third tube, and the third tube, because of course, if you keep feeding this solids or liquids for that matter, eventually you have too much of it.
Right.
And so the third one pulls the excess liquid off so that the tank doesn't overflow. Well, that is really well decomposed, sorry, liquid that makes phenomenal fertilizer. And if you're only using organic matter and you're making sure where it's coming from, so you're not dumping chemicals in there,
Yeah.
you now have this like hyper uh, fantastic fertilizer that you can fertilize your houseplants, your garden, whatever with. So not only are you getting rid of your waste, but you're creating fuel that you can use, and you're fertilizing your plants with it. And
This is a very interesting topic, and it ties in with. Have you heard of what's this guy's company is called Regenetech? There's a documentary called The Need to Grow. Have you seen that?
I have not.
So this guy's doing essentially that in a closed loop system. It's actually very fascinating. So on one side, it's got what's called the dragon, and the dragon is heating up wood to like 1,000 degrees Celsius in an oxygen free, like in a vacuum environment. So no combustion happens inside the dragon thing. So he sticks like leftover wood in there, and what comes out is what's called biochar, or essentially it's just char right now. It's not bio yet because the infusion process hasn't happened. And then on the other side of this place, so he's got all this CO2 that comes off of this dragon, right? That goes into a greenhouse and feeds his plants, right? He's got plants, he's got all
Right.
these sensors sensing the CO2, the methane, all this stuff. And then one of the byproducts of this greenhouse endeavor is methane, which then gets scrubbed and goes back into this dragon system, and he's got a closed loop cycle, very much like what you just said, except it's all contained. And then he takes the biochar from this dragon thing and he infuses that with all his algae that he's grown in his greenhouse. So this closed loop system, its only waste product, get this, the waste product is energy, is electricity.
Wow,
And the
that's cool.
product is biochar. So this biochar stuff, they say it's got in like 1 cubic centimeter, it's got about a football size amount of surface area because of the way it fractalizes down, kind of thing, which makes it ideal for retaining water and holding on to nutrients. So it's kind of like the silver bullet, if you will, to I'm sure you've heard about how we've got like 60 years left of our petrochemical agriculture
Mhm.
system until there's no nutrients left in the soil and we all starve. So it's yeah, that's really one of the cool things I've seen on the horizon.
Yeah, and one of the things to think about, there's a whole bunch of topics in there, but one of them, I'll go with the last thing you mentioned. There's a fair bit of, and I hesitate to use the word because it